Hello, I'm Sean Lambert, and this is Gary Grigsby's War in the East. And today, we're going to be looking at one of the more annoying things for some players when they're first starting, the theater box system, and what you should do while managing all of these crazy theater boxes. So, as the Nazis, you have Western Europe, Norway, Finland, the reserves, garrison, North Africa, Italy, and the Balkans. And then as the Soviets, you've got the Far East, the Northern Front, which is Norway, Finland, the continuation war basically. And then you have your reserves. So the Soviets are a little bit simpler. But the important thing to know is that for the most part, all of the theaters outside of your main theater are pretty much just event driven. And if you keep your men above a certain level, you will gain VPs and APs. And if you let them drop below a certain level, you will lose VPs and APs. And if you keep them kind of just right, you will not do anything. It won't affect the game at all. And so for the most part, as the Soviets, so far, I've just left them at that yellow, it's not going to benefit you, but it's not going to hurt you kind of level. And as the Germans, it's actually early in the game, it's pretty easy to keep a good supply of units in Western Europe and in other theaters. Just make sure you do it right off the bat, because I think it evaluates on turn 5 maybe for the first time. And so you want to make sure that you've got your forces where you want them pretty early. And remember, if you really need those units, you can recall them within a turn. You send them to the theater, they have to stay there for one turn, and then you can get them back the turn after that. So they're not gone forever, you can get them back. The easiest way to handle theater box management in general is with the commander's report. Just like almost all these tips and tricks, you're going to be going to the commander's report, and in this case, you probably are going to be going to the unit page, although there are some scenarios where you want to be maybe moving around air back and forth to your theater boxes. If that's the case, you can look at these in advance. Although I would say in general, you're not moving around air groups as often to the other theaters. You'll rotate through, if they need to be replaced, you can rotate them through, but you're really not necessarily going to add a ton after the beginning of the game. So this is really for the very outset of the game, where you might consider sending some of your older planes, for instance, to the other fronts, and keeping the good stuff for the real game. And I think that's a good strategy in general, is send stuff that you don't really have a great use for. Now, a lot of people would say you don't have the best use for certain infantry types, like kind of light infantry, or I would actually argue mountaineers could be one of those units that you could send over, because their unit size is a little bit smaller. Now, admittedly, they fight pretty well, but they're really just infantry at the end of the day, and because they're a little bit on the smaller side, that they don't add as much as they could as a regular rifle division or a regular infantry division if you're the Germans. So you could consider sending some of those over. Now, say you want to send, in particular, inexperienced men over. I would say that's a great use of this report, is find your most inexperienced divisions and ship them over to Africa. They will, it doesn't matter, their experience over there doesn't matter as much. The stats are not evaluated in that way. It's really just a pure, like, do you have enough mass in this theater or not? That's how the evaluation works, and all of the results are really event driven. So it is kind of scripted in that fashion. It's not like if you send over your best panzer divisions, suddenly the war in Europe will be over. That's just not how the game works. So there's not a huge incentive to send over things that are good. You should send over things that are less useful to you than just their pure mass number in terms of the theater box. Now that kind of handles all the theaters except for the reserve and the map. The reserve and the map are the two special theaters. The reserve is where you will send anything that you want to get or rebuilt. And the reason that you send it to the reserve instead of keeping it on the map is because it rebuilds a unit even from very, very low strength much faster up to full strength. And the way you want to do that is, as soon as you identify you have a unit that you want to send back, you should also check to make sure that they don't have a withdraw date or a disbandment date in the Soviet case. And then once they're in the reserve, you can actually use this commander's report. So I'll demonstrate that right now. You can use the commander's report to, on the Axis reserves, say you want to change these, coastal batteries to not be depleted anymore. You want them to be top priority. So you can just click on the word underneath the status column, and it'll let you switch it just like it does on the counter. So you can switch one, or you could switch a whole bunch to refit. If you wanted to switch all 21 of these units to refit, you could actually click this button up here, set unit refit / reserve setting, and you could set them all to refit if you wanted. I wouldn't recommend doing it maybe to 21 units, but say you had filtered it way down to like 3 units. You could just do them all at once. You wouldn't even have to click the buttons. But if you say you realize you want to do 20 out of 21, you can do refit on all of them and then just come back through and change them back to normal. So it's a really powerful way to use this report. The other most common use for it that I use every single turn is I will go to both the map and then the reserves box, and I will look at the highest and lowest percent TOE. So their table of equipment, how close are they to being full for their current table of equipment? Another good thing to look at is if they have an upgrade upcoming. I think I don't actually have that included on this particular report, but it is one of the fields that you can show turns to order battle change. This box right here, if you show that, see how it says turns to OB change, that'll tell you on what turn it upgrades. So in this case, the 244th Stug Battalion right here, which is currently depleted, will eventually get upgraded to a different type of, probably a different type of Stug. And when that happens, it is best to have them in the reserves at that time, because they will get their new equipment much, much faster. So it's a good thing to keep an eye on. These guys also happen to have a withdraw date. Now you can preemptively clear that transfer if you're on the Nazi side. If you're on the Soviet side, they get withdrawn no matter what, so you don't have as much control. But in general, you don't really want to mess around with the withdrawals. because it can unintentionally mess up the theater box control. If you have enhanced theater box control on, that's an option. I don't believe if you have enhanced theater box control set to off, you can mess with those withdrawal dates. And I think for the first time you're playing the game, it is actually better to have enhanced theater box control on. And in my opinion, as you get more experience with the game, it's something you want to worry about less and less, because you need it less and less. Like those extra APs can be really useful, that the game kind of gives you if you just let it send what it's going to send, and then maybe you supplement it with a few more units. You'll easily get to your plus AP and VP level. If you try to do it all manually, it's a little trickier to suss out exactly what you want there. You just kind of go on the colors, and if you get them green, basically you're going to be getting extra points. The other important thing that the commander's report can do, obviously you can sort by any of these columns, and you can also filter by them. So if you know that you have a particular type of unit that you want to have ready for an offensive, a really good idea is to set your filter to just filter out by that type. So say I want all my motorized, like kind of my good motorized divisions to all get refit within the next 10 turns. I would probably send maybe 50% of them back to the reserves, put them all on refit, and then get them back out there. Or you could do it in smaller groups. You can do like 2 or 3 at a time. But you can use this report to kind of filter that, so you know, okay, I'm sending these particular types of units back to the reserves to get refit. Because like I said, even if a unit's relatively healthy, they're still always going to be refit faster if they're in the reserves. Kind of the tier list of the speed of reinforcement is, bottom tier is, front line, out of supply, or isolated, I guess, is probably the bottom of the barrel. And then like one step up from that is with a good leader that is rolling all their logistics rolls very well. They'll get a trickle of stuff. The next step up from that, and really what you should do pretty much every time if you're not planning to send them back to the reserves, like if you need to keep the counter on the field for some sort of emergency reason, you can't send them back, or you've already sent back too much stuff and it's already being refit, and you don't know when you might get this guy back. In that kind of case, you could put them on a depot with their general, so with an HQ unit that they're assigned to. And if they're on the depot, so let me give you an example of that. So let's make Dibika a depot right here, and say we have our 17th Army right here. We would move them onto this depot where Army Group South currently is, and then say this 4th Mountain Division we wanted to get refit. We would move them. Let me just execute so I can get to the. Oh, it's doing the full turn. Whoops! I forgot it has the default setup. So basically, what I'm getting at is you can set up your guys in advance to kind of refit before you need them. That's the idea. It's like you don't really want to be doing the depot refits if you don't have to. If you can afford to take them all the way off the line and get them back to the reserves, they will refit much more efficiently and much faster. And you don't have to deal with some of the other issues around reinforcements, such as trucks getting stolen by, resupply, because that happens. If your logistics are bad, your trucks will be stolen, which is kind of unavoidable. So if they're off the map, that's never going to happen to them. They're never going to lose trucks because they're using them for supply. All right. I finally got control back. All right, so where was I? I was at like Army Group South or something, right? Let me see if I can find one that already has a depot. Probably like Warsaw here. Yeah, Warsaw's already a level 3 depot. So I will turn on the depot things. Oh, this is a perfect example. Radom here. So we have this 46th motorized corps. If we move them onto this depot right here, and then say we want the 10th Panzer Division to be refit, we would move them onto Radom, set them on refit, and they will be refitting pretty damn close to how fast it refits for the reserves. It is much, much faster this way. It's enhanced further by your leadership abilities. In particular, the stat that drives reinforcement is admin. So if one of the tricks is to have a general that has very high admin, even if it's only a couple generals, they might have bad other stats, but if their admin is very high, you want to use them for as many refits as possible. So a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll have kind of a refit general that doesn't have a lot of units assigned to him, and he has high admin but maybe low like infantry, and I will use him as the place where they go back so that they're going to pass all their supply rolls. That's the key. As the Germans in the early game, that's really not as much of a concern, but as the Soviets, it's a huge concern. You are constantly battling the horrible generalship that you have, and you will have units that don't receive supply that are standing on a depot, and you're like, what are you guys doing? Why won't you just open the boxes of food? Just open them. And the truth is, it's because their commanders are probably pilfering them or selling them or something like that, enriching themselves with it. And your army's corruption is causing these issues. So that's the simulation. That's the idea of the simulation, is your army is so ineptly corrupt and so stupid that you just can't get supply even if you're standing right next to it. So I think that kind of gives you a foundation of what theater box control is like, but it is very situational. I will say that every single turn I would recommend open the commander's report and look at your high and low TOE. So like if anything is high and it's in the theater in a theater box such as the reserves or even the Far East or the Caucasus, if one of those units is super high, you might want to bring them onto the map. Even if they're in a theater box, you can send something that's low strength, or send a couple things that are low strength over to the less important theater boxes, and instead you'll have this nice high strength unit on the map. And obviously for the reserves, you want to keep bringing in reserves as soon as they get to, I often use 80%, but it's really a matter of personal preference. If you really think that you need full strength units at a certain point in the war, more power to you, but you can get by with 90% no problem. 90% is still, like in this case, 14,000 men is plenty. They're they're holding ground. They're not attacking. So on the Soviet side, you got to think of it as, I need counters. I don't necessarily need perfect counters. I just need bodies. I need to hold the line. And the reality is you have to throw just green as grass conscripts in there sometimes, and just to hold the line. Yes, they're going to get beat up, they're going to get destroyed, but that has to be the mentality. And the best way to do that is just come here, check whatever's kind of close on the TOE. Don't expect it to get all the way to 100%. And as the Germans later in the war, it's the same thing. Don't expect units to get back to 100%. Even if they at one time might have been a great unit, they're no longer going to be that great unit by the end of the war. So you have to make do with whatever you can get out of them. Get it as good as you can get, but don't sit them there for 10 turns trying to refit. Especially if they're waiting on some equipment that's not even being produced, or is produced very slowly, or is being constantly lost by the other frontline units. If you're waiting for a Tiger, it might not get built before the end of the war. So yeah, you might as well just send them back out there with what they have. So that's basically the foundation of using the commander report to handle the theater box issues. And otherwise, you just kind of will go off the color coding on the top right up here. And that will tell you the intensity, which will give you an idea of how many troops you need. And it's, like I said, it's just a pure numbers game. How many divisions you have there that are considered combat divisions, and how much supply it gets. That's how it's evaluated. It doesn't matter necessarily on the quality of those units. It matters on the quantity. Admittedly, higher quality units usually have more quantity as well, but don't bother with sending 100% units up there. Send the 70% ones that you don't really want for your frontline units. Or if you are down to the 70% ones, send the 60% ones. It's kind of a balancing act, and that's the idea of the theater boxes. It's forcing you to balance the needs of your front line with the needs of these other wars that are also going on, but are less important. Never forget that this is the war. The other stuff is just sideshows, which is great because that's exactly what real life was like for the Soviets and the Germans. They were the war. Everything else was a sideshow. So with that, I will leave it there, and hopefully you'll come back for another tips and tricks next time. See ya.